Good morning. So this is a very basic, quick presentation. Thank you for having me. The first question we are considering is climate versus weather, and then we're going to touch on a very few other weather questions. Now, climate and weather all very often get misused. So what is the difference between weather and climate? Weather is a short time phenomenon. So it's basically the difference is just the time. Weather changes within a few minutes or a few hours. If you look at the mornings where the sun is shining and then suddenly in the afternoon it's raining and before it gets dark the sun is shining again, that we consider as weather. It changes very quickly within a few minutes, few hours. Like they say, if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes, it will change. Climate, on the other hand, takes a very long time to change. Climate also gets classified into classifications like tropical or subtropical or polar climate. It takes a long time to change. The pole's climate is not going to change suddenly to tropical in a matter of a day or a month. It takes very many years for the climate to change. Another question we are considering today is what are clouds and rain? A cloud is made up of very tiny droplets of water or ice crystals that are so small that they can float in the air. Now, how do they form? Basically, it's very easy. The sun warms the surface, warm moist air rises up to the point where the air expands and cools down, and then it condenses into water droplets. And many water droplets form clouds for us. A practical example of this is looking when you boil a pot of water on the stove. Then the steam that rises up from that pot can be considered a cloud because it is airborne droplets. How does rain form? In the cloud, the droplets bang together. Now, again, if you go back to your kitchen and look at that pot of boiling water, if you put the lid on top, those droplets are going to bang together and they are going to run down that pot's lid and fall down as droplets. That can be considered rain if we want to be technical about it. So in the clouds, the raindrops bang together, and when they are big enough, then gravity takes over and they fall to earth as rain. Now we get rainstorms and we get thunderstorms. And in big storms, we often have lightning. And you must remember, lightning are all very dangerous. It doesn't matter if it's cloud-to-cloud lightning, like in here, or if it's cloud-to-ground lightning. All lightning are dangerous. And whenever there's a lightning storm, never ever hide under a tree, because lightning likes striking trees. And when you're under that tree, that lightning is going to strike you as well. Another question is, how do we measure weather? We use weather stations. Now, in the olden days, we had to make use of weather observers. Now, a weather observer has to run in from his little house here to the weather station setup, and he has to go to each of these elements to measure the weather. I'm quickly going to show you what all these elements are. We have over there the sun hour measure. It's a crystal ball, if you want to believe me. It's a glass ball that literally burns sunshine hours into a piece of paper. The observer must change that paper every day. There we have a rain gauge. It has a tin on the inside that captures the rain as it falls, and he has to measure it in a measuring cup to say how much it rained. So this is called the wind run. It has numbers on it that the weather observer must write down. This is an A-pan. It measures evaporation. You must make sure that that pan is full, and then every day measure how much of the water evaporated in that day. This is called the Stevenson screen, and inside of the Stevenson screen, We have a thermohygrograph that measures temperature and humidity, and then also thermometers, wet and dry bulb thermometers. And the weather observer must change this every day to make sure and write down the observations every day. That means that poor guy cannot go on holiday. He's not allowed to get sick because 8 o'clock every morning he has to run out and come do all of this to make sure that the weather gets measured accurately. Now in the new world, we use automatic weather stations. They look like this. They have a rain gauge. That rain gauge has a bucket inside and a switch that counts out how many times that bucket flips, and the water runs out at the bottom. So no need for a person to measure that rain. There we have wind speed and direction. That is also measured automatically. A solar panel to keep everything going. And in there we have these little, that looks like a stack of saucers, is in place of that big Stevenson screen we had at the mechanical weather stations. In there we measure temperature and relative humidity with only one small sensor, and on top of it we have a radiation sensor. So unfortunately we don't stare into crystal balls anymore. Inside the weather station box we have a data logger that is like a computer that saves all the data that is collected from the different sensors. We have a regulator and battery setup that's connected to the solar panel to keep everything going. And of course, we need to communicate with the weather station, and there is also a logger and an antenna for us to communicate with these weather stations. So why is it important for us to measure weather and to know what's going on in weather? If we understand the weather and climate, we can plan for the future. We can plan for climate change. We can plan for basically anything that we have coming at us. If we understand the weather, we can plan for it. Also, if we can measure the weather, we can make decisions to make our life better. For instance, farmers use rainfall measurements and rainfall numbers to plan their irrigation. If it hasn't rained in a little while, they give their plants water with irrigation. If it rained yesterday, obviously they don't need to water their plants today. Also, just on a little personal note, if we know what the weather is going to do, we will know how to bring an umbrella so that we don't get wet on our way home this afternoon. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for that interesting talk. I hope we all remember to check the weather this morning so that we don't get rained on. We have 2 minutes, just 2 minutes for questions. And I see a few hands already. I think the first one is Chimangazo. Please go ahead. Ask your question. Okay, Chimangazo, are you there? If not, then we'll go to the next question. Do we... Another hand. Please unmute and ask your question. Unmute your mic and ask the question.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for an interesting presentation. I have a question with regards to the automatic weather stations. How often do we need to maintain them, and what kind of maintenance is needed for them to keep running?
Thank you. That is a brilliant question. We aim to visit the weather stations at least twice a year. Of course, there are all kinds of things that might prevent us from doing it. So if we do it once or twice a year, then we can keep them in a relatively good way. We send people out there with a calibrated calibration kit, and then we check the weather data from that calibrated kit against the weather of the weather station. Basically, we're putting a mobile weather station right next to it, and we're checking that the values are similar. And if necessary, then we replace or adjust the sensors as necessary. Also, my job actually is to look at the data that we collect every day from the weather stations and to pick up errors if there are errors, and then to send out the guys more urgently than once every 6 months if there's a problem with the weather station, to fix it if they can, otherwise to replace the sensor.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Please, everyone, keep engaging in the chat room, posting your questions there.